Shabbat Shalom, Saints of the Most High, and welcome to the Messianic Torah Observer's Sabbath Thoughts and Reflections. I'm Rod Thomas, and I want to thank you for fellowshipping with me here on this blessed day of rest. For it is here that we gather every Shabbat, every week, to delve into Yehovah's eternal words of life, His instructions in righteousness, which happen to be our constitution and the very foundation for our covenant relationship with the Creator of the universe. And as always, beloved, it is our hope, trust, and prayer that this installment of the Messianic Torah Observer's Sabbath Thoughts and Reflections finds you, your families, and fellowships well and blessed. Well, I'm excited to present to you part 2 of the message that I delivered to the brethren in Huntsville back this past Pesach, unleavened bread. But before I get into that message, I want to thank you all who have, over the last several months and even years, supported this ministry, the Messianic Torah Observer, the ministry, this platform, either through your donations or your continued your continued listenership and readership. You all know who you are. And I have endeavored to try to reach out to you and thank you for your continued support. And I want to say from the bottom of my heart and Hillary's heart and this ministry's heart that we are so grateful to have you. And you are the ones who keep this ministry going. This is a small flock. This is a narrow way. This is a narrow gate that we enter into, so we don't get the big numbers that many podcasts, that many blog compendiums have. It just doesn't work that way. And sometimes it gets a bit, how should I describe it? Discouraging when you look at the numbers, because I'm a consumer of news. I'm a consumer of information. So I'm quite aware of what constitutes a successful podcast, a successful YouTube channel, a successful medium out there these days. And I can tell you that this program doesn't come even close to a percentage of those more popular programs, those more popular platforms. But I take it to the Father, and Father puts it in its proper perspective for me. And He tells me that, this is a small flock, very few people. He sends the increase. Father sends those with eyes to see and ears to hear, and hearts, most importantly, hearts that are willing to bend to His will, to bend to His instructions in righteousness. So it's not up to me. It's nothing I can do. It's nothing that I should be doing other than what He's instructed me to do on this program, to increase the audience, to grow the audience and all of that. At one time I was consumed with that, and I've stopped because it's Father's. This is Father's platform. This is Abba's platform. So I leave it to Him to bring about the increase, to bring about the readership, to bring about the donations that come. And we're grateful for every single bit of or type of support that we receive for this ministry. So again, from the bottom of our hearts, I want to thank you for what you do to stand with this ministry. Thank you, thank you, thank you. The other thing that I want to put forth before getting into the discussion today, and this is just Rod. It has really nothing to do with the message today or any previous messages or anything, but this is just my outreach to you. Those of you who stand with this ministry and who are familiar with the message of this ministry. If there's anything I can do to encourage you, to prepare for the dark days ahead, please listen to me. Please hearken to me. Please take serious what I'm about to say. Things in this country, and I'm limiting it. Sorry. I'm limiting it to this country, although this is a worldwide concern. But, beloved, we're facing some dark days ahead. If there has ever been a time in human history, especially in the history of this nation, when it seems that we are in the end times, it is now. The hearts of men have become so deceitful and desperately wicked. From those who we may not ever come to know, the everyday on the street Jane and John Smith, all the way up to the President of the United States, the hearts of the citizenry, the hearts of the people of this nation in general. I'm not talking about the converted souls. I'm not talking about the children of Yah, the chosen ones, the saints. I'm talking about the world. I'm talking about Babylon, this nation as Babylon. Is reaching a place where we need to really start to think about what Father needs us to do and where we're going and the times in which we're living. They're talking about food shortages. And yes, some of the shelves in our grocery stores have been sparse, if not even empty. So the food supply chain is being disrupted, and it's being disrupted intentionally, beloved. Intentionally. Came across an article this week that talked about mysterious destructions of the food processing plants of this nation. Mysterious fires that are happening in these plants. Destruction of the property in these plants. An airplane crashing into a food processing plant recently. How is this happening? Why is it happening now? What does it all mean? They're tampering with this nation's finances. They want to know what's in your bank accounts. They want to know how you're spending the money in your bank accounts. They want to control your spending. They want to have access, direct access to your accounts. What does that mean? Where is that going? They attempted already over the last 2 years to disrupt our health, our collective and individual health, through this, what they call a vaccine. And we all know now, it's all coming out right now. It has been trickling out throughout the last 2 years, but it's really coming out now as to what these vaccines really do and what they don't do. Yeshua told his disciples that when they saw the terrible things befalling their beloved Jerusalem, that they were to run. They were to run to the hills. He didn't tell them to sit idly by and wait on Father to deliver them, or to just succumb to the onslaught. He told them to look to the hills and run. Take refuge. Do what you need to do to take care of yourself and your families. And he said this because he knew they'd be of no good to him and the cause of the gospel and to the cause of the kingdom if they were killed, if they were unhealthy, if they were imprisoned. And by extension, we must take similar precautions to prepare ourselves for the things that are set to befall us in these coming days, months, and years. So I would encourage you, beloved, to start stocking up on food now. Because we don't know how difficult or even impossible it will be to even purchase food in the days ahead. And I know that for some of us, it's an issue of money. For some of us, it's an issue of logistics. A lot of us don't have acreage and resources to plant things, to grow our food, to have a sustainable type of lifestyle that a remnant of the brethren do. But we are all in our place, the place where Father has placed us. And we make best out of those situations, out of the situations we find ourselves in. So whatever you can do, I'm encouraging you, make preparations. If it's every time you go to the grocery store, whether it's every week, every couple weeks, or monthly, pick up a few extra items. Pick up some canned items or dry items that you can store so that when times get really, really bad, and I'm almost certain, as they used to say, I bet you dollars to a donut that this is going to happen because they're already doing their best to mess us up. And they're going to do their best to make us succumb to the nanny state of this nation. So prepare with food. I know it's controversial to say, but I would say also make provisions to defend yourself. Now, however you choose to do that, however you are led to do that, that's your business. I know we have a lot of brethren in the faith who are outright against people arming themselves, defending themselves. God did not tell you to buy a gun. Whatever. Shut up. I mean, you do what you need to do to protect yourself within the framework of Yah's will for your life, within the framework of the provisions you have, the resources you have. Take precautions. If it's not buying weapons or what have you, do what you can to make your family and yourself secure. Stay aware, stay educated, stay informed. Look for ways out. And I mean that in every respect in life. Look for exit strategies in order to take care of yourself and your family. So I don't want to belabor that. There are a ton of websites and ministries and platforms out there that address this thing. And I'm not talking about being a prepper. I am not a prepper. Have no intentions of being a prepper. But I am practicing what I preach. We are preparing ourselves for difficult times ahead. In the past year, we've done things to our home to help us prepare for difficult times. And we're continuing, and we're also improving our situation. We're stocking up on some essential food supplies. We don't have a root cellar with years of foodstuffs in stock. We're doing what we can within our budget, within our means to prepare. So I would encourage you, and I wouldn't do this if I didn't love you, because I see the handwriting on the wall and I want only the best for you. So that's all I really wanted to say in starting the program. So without further ado, I want to go into this week's post. This is part 2 of the Exceeding Kingdom Qualifying Righteousness discussion or teaching that I gave to the fellowship over in Huntsville this past Pesach unleavened bread. And I will be picking up from where I left off in part 1. Same title, the Exceeding Kingdom Qualifying Righteousness that takes us from Passover or Pesach to Tabernacles or Sukkot, or rather from Babylon or the world onward to the kingdom. And if by chance you didn't catch last week's discussion, I would humbly encourage you to check it out. That discussion forms the basis for our discussion here today. In that discussion, we identified a critical kingdom qualifying concern that affects every would-be disciple of Yeshua Messiah. And that critical kingdom qualifying concern is found in Matthew chapter 5, verses 17 through 20, which reads, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." Verse 18, "For truly I say unto you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will pass from the law until all is accomplished." Verse 19, "Therefore, whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and then teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and he teaches or she teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven." Beloved, why don't denominationalists pay attention to this key passage? Continuing, verse 20, "For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." The English Standard Version rendering. So we see laid out here before us in this passage, clear as day, the astounding declaration that for any disciple of Yeshua Messiah to make it into the kingdom of Yah, the kingdom of heaven, his or her righteousness must exceed, it must surpass that of the scribes and Pharisees. The other thing to mention here is that as a framework for our last discussion, I likened Passover or Pesach to the starting point of the spiritual journey that we as Yah's elect must embark on, with a goal of making it to Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles, which is emblematic of the kingdom of Yah. And that we enter Passover, Pesach, unleavened bread, with our eyes, our hearts, our minds, and souls fixed on and excitedly anticipating the coming Feast of Tabernacles, or Sukkot, or rather the kingdom of Yah. So we talked about the dire need for us to possess a righteousness that transcends the righteousness of the religious elite, such as the scribes and Pharisees, if we are desirous, if we are intending to make it into the kingdom. So today, beloved, I want to quickly touch upon what that exceeding, surpassing righteousness looks like in our Creator's eye. Practically speaking, how we get our grubby little fingers on that exceeding kingdom qualifying righteousness that takes us from Passover, from Pesach, unleavened bread, to Tabernacles or Sukkot. So with that, I'll see you on the other side. Shalom, beloved. Whatever system we put our trust, that we place our faith into, to take us from Passover to Tabernacles, from Pesach to Sukkot, be that system a religious one, a secular one, or even an idealistic one, requires that we follow a set of standards and then conform to those standards to the way of life that the leaders of those systems have put into place. For the denominationalist, it's all about reciting the sinner's prayer and then waiting for the rapture of the church. For the Catholic, it's all about conforming to the Catholic way of life, being a good Catholic. For the Jew, it's all about one's Jewishness and adhering to the teachings and way of life put forth by the rabbinic sages. And for the idealist, it's whatever foolishness one conjures up in his or her mind that gets them to the kingdom, such as simply being a good person. God knows my heart, whatever that truly means. The Jewish religious system had an established set of standards that the everyday Betty and John Smiths of the world had to adhere to if they had any inkling of making it into the kingdom, the Jewish version of the kingdom, let's say. Those standards, if followed precisely, made one righteous in the eyes of the religious leaders of Yeshua's day. Righteousness, as we briefly discussed in our last post, is essential for one to make it into the kingdom. But that kingdom qualifying righteousness does not come to us as a result of our following the rules, our following or engaging into the traditions, or adhering to the laws or the doctrines of any religion, or that of any religious organization, including the Church Triumphant, dun, dun, dun. Nor is it of one's own set of righteous principles and standards, but rather that exceeding kingdom qualifying righteousness that takes us from Passover to Tabernacles, from Pesach to Sukkot, from the world to the kingdom, comes exclusively to the disciple of Yahushua Messiah in response to his or her obedience to the Torah of the creator of the universe and the teachings and example of the Father's right arm, Yeshua Messiah. Now, the problem, however, is that those righteous standards that we are required to walk out, to live out, to operate in if we are to make it into the kingdom, when properly followed by the would-be child of the Most High, those righteous standards are harder to meet than even the established standards of the scribes and Pharisees. Those exceeding standards, which translates into the Father's exclusive prescribed way of life for those who he has chosen, his elect, his set-apart ones, was described by our Master as likened unto a narrow gate and a very difficult pathway that only a remnant, only a precious few ever find. Matthew chapter 7, verses 13 and 14. So our mission, if we choose to take it, is to somehow find and walk out that rocky, difficult path and then enter that narrow gate that becomes our exceeding kingdom qualifying righteousness. But to locate and walk out that rough, rocky road and enter that narrow gate, we must first have the desire to do so. We must desperately want the kingdom and be willing to do what it takes to get there. Right? How often have we taken on things, taken on adventures, endeavors, projects, whatever? We've taken them on in our lives, and we truly didn't want to take those on in the first place. We were hesitant. We knew it was going to be difficult, but we took them on anyway. And we eventually find ourselves, because our hearts weren't in that adventure, that endeavor, that project in the first place, we find ourselves slacking, dragging our feet throughout the term of the project, neglecting to do that which we originally agreed to do. And so we ultimately end up, dropping out of that adventure, that program, that endeavor altogether. We effectively fail to count the cost associated with that endeavor at the very beginning. And we end up dropping out, giving up, stopping. And we make up reasons. We just didn't have the time to really do it. I got sick. I had money issues. All kinds of excuses. But the real gist is that we didn't count the cost. We just went through the motions of doing it because for whatever reason, we just felt we had to do it. But did we really have the burning desire to complete that endeavor, that project, that journey? So this journey that leads us from Passover or Pesach to Tabernacles or Sukkot must begin in essence with the desire to make it to Tabernacles. And the exorbitant costs that are associated with that journey must be factored into one's desire and intention to walk out that journey towards the kingdom. We all know of cases where many have taken on this difficult journey over the years, only to have dropped out during the journey because he or she did not count the immense costs that are associated with messianic discipleship. As I've said many times on this platform, beloved, like everything in life, there are no true free lunches. There is always a cost associated with it. And in order to fulfill those costs, you got to really desire it to the point that nothing is going to stop you from achieving that goal. Beloved, this journey that we have been called to is not about blindly keeping Father's feast, keeping the kosher laws, the food laws. It's not about working on the Sabbath, although all those are very and vitally important. Those, however, are the basic elementary elements of righteousness that we are compelled to possess and walk in. The very elementary areas. And quite frankly, those are the easier aspects of the journey towards Sukkot and Tabernacles that we are to take. Oh, there's so much more to walking out this faith and true messianic discipleship than meets the eye. Although some in our faith community would have you believe that it's only about keeping the Sabbath, eating clean, and keeping the feast. But rather, Abba demands more from us, beloved. He, in fact, demands everything from us. Abba demands that we turn our entire lives over to him and walk uprightly before him in all our ways. That we obey his Torah in spirit and in truth with love, justice, and mercy as our spiritual guides. That we imitate our Master Yeshua in every conceivable way. That we lean not to our own understanding in the ways we conduct ourselves along this difficult path, this difficult journey, but rather that we trust Abba Father to guide our walk, to lead our walk, to guide and and govern our talk and thoughts throughout our days, such that we glorify and image him in the earth, such that we exist in an exclusive covenant relationship with him and with no other Elohim but him. So one of the first things that we must do to achieve that exceeding kingdom qualifying righteousness that gets us from Passover to Tabernacles, from Pesach to Sukkot, from the world to the kingdom, is to desperately want it and to count the cost of true messianic discipleship from the very beginning. Case in point, what many of us know today in Scripture as the so-called Sermon on the Mount, from which I drew Yeshua's pronouncement that one's righteousness must exceed that of the scribes and Pharisees if he or she wants to enter the kingdom of heaven. Well, the Sermon on the Mount constitutes the essential keys to the kingdom. If we want to understand what kingdom qualifying righteousness looks like, that's one of the primary places we need to go. The Sermon on the Mount. 3 chapters of instructions in righteousness, chapters 5 through 7 of Matthew, that Yehoshua devoted to unlocking the mysteries of how his would-be disciples qualify for the kingdom. Denominationalism has taught us that the great Sermon on the Mount was attended by hundreds, if not thousands of people, and they all wanted to receive those keys to the kingdom. You've seen the paintings where a well-groomed and well-dressed Jesus is sitting on a rock with his hands up and his demeanor serious, as it appears he is teaching the masses the truths of the kingdom. It makes you really, from the way it's written, if you just do a gloss over, it does appear that Yeshua was teaching, was preaching, was addressing a multitude of individuals. But what if I were to tell you that that's not exactly accurate? Because the truth of the matter is that the Sermon on the Mount, the so-called Sermon on the Mount, the great Sermon on the Mount, was actually attended by just a handful of Yeshua's disciples. Just a handful. Most notably his inner core of 12 disciples, and some have even said only just 4 or 5 of them. What are you talking about, Rod? That's outrageous. I can hear it now. But we find in Matthew chapter 5, verse 1, the following. Pay close attention. And seeing the multitudes. Who is seeing the multitudes? Why, Yeshua is. He sees the multitudes. Continuing. He, Yeshua, went up into a mountain. It may have been a mountain or it may have been a hillside, but Yeshua sees the masses, sees the multitude. He turns around and he goes and heads up the mountain. Continuing. And when he was set, meaning he did what he had to do to prepare, he gets himself ready and he sets himself up, and it continues, his disciples came unto him. You see, only those who Yeshua chose and who hungered and thirsted after righteousness chose to ascend the mountain, the hillside. Some would say the rocky hillside, the rocky pathway, the narrow gate. They chose to ascend that hillside to sit at Master's feet and receive those essential keys to the kingdom. But what about the multitude, you ask? Well, those seeking healing, and that's what this multitude consisted of. People who were in need of healing, people who were looking for a meal, people who were looking for a sign from Yeshua. That's who the multitude were. They were focused on their personal lives for that day without any anticipatory eye towards tabernacles, towards the kingdom. Well, Luke records that Yeshua came down from the mountain after teaching his disciples these keys to the kingdom, and he healed those of the crowd that were sick. And then he gives the members of that crowd what some have described as the Sermon on the Plain. Luke chapter 6, verses 17 through 49. Comparatively, this Sermon on the Plain was just a snippet of the Sermon on the Mount that his called out ones, that Yeshua's disciples received just previously. This is why intense study of Scripture is so important, to put these pieces together. Because tradition would tell us that the multitude climbed the mountain and they heard. I mean, I've engaged in conversation. Well, how could so many people hear what Yeshua was saying? Well, there was probably the echo that carried over. It was probably resonance, or it was something. And we were thinking about, we try to rationalize something that's really not there. But rather the reality is that Yeshua was speaking to just a handful of people. That's the way this journey works, beloved. That only a remnant hunger and thirst enough, desire the kingdom enough to come and sit at the Master's feet and hear the keys to the kingdom, the truth, instructions in righteousness. It's not a highway to heaven, beloved, but a narrow gate and an arduous, rocky, and difficult path. So one of the first steps toward receiving that kingdom qualifying righteousness is to want it, to desire it. The second step is to die to self and exclusively walk in our Father's ways. Of this, our Master stated in Matthew chapter 7, verse 21, "Not everyone that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, or Master, Master, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven." And here's the crux. "But he that doeth the will of my Father which is in heaven." What is the will of the Father in heaven? Quite simply this. Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 13. "Fear God, fear Elohim, fear Jehovah, Yahuwah, Yahweh, and keep his commandments." Fear Elohim and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Denominationalists contend, or the church triumphant contends, that we don't have to keep or live or walk out Torah. We don't have to operate in Father's instructions in righteousness. Why? Because the whole of Torah, the whole of the law, according to these, was done away with the sacrifice of our Master Jesus. That these laws, this Torah, was nailed to the cross along with Jesus. And they love to cite Colossians chapter 2, verse 14. Well, unfortunately, these are completely missing the connection that exists between exceeding kingdom qualifying righteousness and obedience to the Creator's way of life. For in that same conversation, I'm talking about the Sermon on the Mount, Yeshua told his disciples, and this is going back again at the beginning, Matthew chapter 5. We're going to be looking at verses 17 through 19. And the King James Version rendering says, "Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, till all be fulfilled. Whosoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments, and shall teach men so, he or she shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven." In other words, beloved, Yeshua is saying to us here in this passage that as his disciples, we don't get a free pass into the kingdom. We must instead meticulously walk in his Father's ways, not in the ways of religion, not the ways that best suit us, that suit our sensibilities, that suit our preferences, but rather in Yah's set-apart ways. And woe unto any who have the audacity to refuse to walk in his Father's ways, and who then encourage others not to obey the Creator's instructions in righteousness. These who dare do this will be essentially persona non grata in the kingdom, unaccepted and unwelcomed in the kingdom. Why are millions of denominationalists putting themselves in such a difficult and impossible situation, I ask, when the evidence is staring them right there in the face? Switching gears, for a Levitical priest to enter the dwelling place of Yah, the holy place of the tabernacle or temple, he had to be ritually pure. He had to be blameless. Otherwise, he would not be permitted to enter the holy place. And if he were to violate the ritual purity requirements for operating in the holy place, well, he stood the inevitable chance of being struck down by Yah's presence, by Yah's spirit. Now, if we liken the kingdom of Yah to the holy place of the tabernacle or temple for back in the day, to that of the coming kingdom of Yah, let's just say, the place where Yah will dwell with his chosen ones, we must be in a state of righteousness that is beyond reproach. We must be clean if we expect to make it into the kingdom, make it to Sukkot. When we come into faith, having repented, having committed our whole lives to an obedient covenant relationship with the eternal, we are gifted a brand new, pressed, spotless set of righteous garments. And those garments are gifted to us. They are imputed to us. And without those righteous garments, we cannot enter the kingdom of Yah. Yah's grace at work. However, there's always a however with Rod. The denominationalists contend that once you receive those gifted garments of righteousness, you don't have to do anything more with them or to them. You're good to go. You don't even have to wash and maintain them. I'm being rhetorical here. And so a good many of these folks are going to show up at the gates to the kingdom on that day, doing what? Wearing those neglected, tired, dirty, unkempt, once righteous garments, and they're going to be turned away by our master, who will tell them that he never knew them, that they are to depart from his presence because they were workers of lawlessness. And this is found in Matthew chapter 7, verses 22 and 23. You see, these did not maintain their garments of righteousness by obeying Yah's instructions in righteousness, staying righteous and pure to qualify for the kingdom. And so the last thing that we must do to achieve that kingdom qualifying righteousness is to maintain those pristine garments of righteousness that Yah gifted us, that Yah imputed unto us through the person and ministries of Yeshua, our Messiah. When we enter into covenant relationship with Father, we have work to do to maintain those pristine garments of righteousness. We find in Revelation chapter 3, verses 14 through 22, our Master Yeshua's critical assessment of the church of Laodicea. And Yeshua assessed that the church of Laodicea was severely lacking spiritually. What was Laodicea's problem? Well, these had become marginal. They had become tepid, spiritually speaking. Milquetoast believers who Yeshua described as being neither hot nor cold. These had deluded themselves into thinking they'd arrived, like so many of us today in the Messianic Hebrew roots community. Oh, we keep the Sabbaths and we follow a few of those Jewish traditions and we make an attempt at keeping the Sabbath. Oh, and we eat kosher. Everything that enters, it passes through our teeth and down our throat, we make sure that the rabbis have sanctioned it. We've made it. We've arrived. So, like Laodiceans, they did nothing beyond that to maintain their gifted righteous garments. And Yeshua was so frustrated with Laodicea that he threatened to, quote, spit them out of his mouth, end quote, if they didn't get their spiritual acts together. So he encourages the Laodiceans. He doesn't just discard them. He encourages them. He gives them a chance. He tells them to be zealous in their walk in Messiah. He tells them to remain in a covenant relationship with the Father by obediently walking steadfastly in his Father's ways. And if they were to mess up along the way, they were to repent. They were to return to Teshuvah and stay ever so close to him. So, beloved, how do we, by extension, maintain our righteous garments and not be spit out by Yeshua on that day? Quite simply, don't be a slacker. Don't try to shirk Yah's instructions in righteousness. Don't try to circumvent his ways in a futile effort or attempt to appeal to our own flawed sense of righteousness or personal preferences. The angel told John the Revelator that the endurance of the saints of Elohim are those that keep the Creator's commandments and maintain a trusting faith in Yeshua Messiah. Revelation chapter 14, verse 12. We need to pay attention to the details of Father's instructions. Don't overlook things. Don't water his instructions down. Don't quench the move of the Spirit in our lives. Beloved, we may sometimes get the overwhelming feeling that everything we've discussed here in this teaching today is ridiculously hard and virtually impossible to do and maintain those garments of righteousness. That getting from Pesach to Sukkot, from Passover to Tabernacles, from the world to the kingdom is an impossible task. That making it into the kingdom can't be done, and that it's just too hard to do, especially living in this world. But let us keep this beautiful exchange that Yeshua had with his disciples in mind whenever we feel overwhelmed in our journey towards Tabernacle, towards Sukkot. Matthew chapter 19, verses 25 through 29. And the modified King James reads, when his disciples heard it, that is, Yeshua's rejection of the rich young ruler to become one of his disciples, when they saw and heard what happened there, the disciples, continuing, they were exceedingly amazed, saying, who then can be saved? Verse 26. But Yeshua beheld them and said unto them, with men this is impossible. Making it into the kingdom is impossible with men alone. Continuing, but with Yah, all things are possible. Verse 27. Then answered Peter and said unto him, behold, look, we have forsaken all and followed you, Yeshua, our master. What shall we have therefore? In other words, what Peter was boldly saying is, look, master, we've given up everything in our personal lives to follow you. What's in it for us to even attempt to make it into the kingdom, which you've described as being essentially out of reach for even rich folk? Verse 28. And Yeshua said unto them, verily I say unto you, truly I say unto you, that ye which have followed me in the regeneration, that is, in the Messianic age, when the Son of Man shall sit in the throne of his glory, you shall also sit upon 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Yisrael. Verse 29, and everyone that hath forsaken houses, or brethren, or sisters, or father, or mother, or wife, or children, or lands, for my name's sake, shall receive 100-fold, and shall inherit everlasting life. All of what he listed there, our master, constitutes the cost associated with true messianic discipleship that we mentioned earlier. Weighing the cost, having the desire. Beloved, Tabernacles, Sukkot, the kingdom is all within our reach. So let us then press onward to the kingdom. Let us always hunger and thirst after that exceeding righteousness that qualifies us for the kingdom. And let us never forget that Father's Spirit, Abba's precious Ruach HaKodesh, is fully accessible to each of us, and he will help us along this arduous journey from Pesach to Sukkot, from Passover to Tabernacles, from Babylon or the world to the kingdom. Thank you. Well, beloved, I trust that you got as much from that teaching as I received from preparing and presenting it to the brethren at the Huntsville Fellowship a couple weeks ago. And I was very happy to present it and share it with you, and I pray that it blessed you. I trust that it blessed you. So we'll bring this installment of the Messianic Torah Observer's Sabbath Thoughts and Reflections to a close. And until next time, in parting, and as always, may you be most blessed, fellow saints in training. Shabbat Shalom, Shavua Tov. Take care.